Good morning. Welcome. I hope that woke you up. We're excited to be here today. My name is Jason Watson. I'm a program manager on the Windows Experiences and Devices team. And joining me on stage is Raymond Chen, who's a programmer on the same team. Yes. So we're excited to be here today. Yesterday during Joe Belfiore's keynote, you saw a glimpse of the value proposition of sets for your customers, and also for you and for me, for essentially all users of Windows. Today, we wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about the developer opportunity. We want to talk about what sets means for your business and for your applications. And so that's what we'll focus on today. Sets is essentially a new way for users to be productive on Windows by helping them to group apps and web content together. But most importantly, being able to help those customers to get back to that content on any of the devices that they own. This will help them to increase productivity, help them to get work done in the most effective way. With this user opportunity also comes new re-engagement opportunities for you and for your apps. First, with sets, we're introducing a new surface in Windows called the new tab page. This surface is easily discoverable by users from any window on the system and makes it really easy for your customers to find and launch your applications in the context of a set that they're working on. Another opportunity that Sets introduces for you is that Windows will prompt users to restore tabs for your app when a user opens up a document that's related. So with this feature, with Sets, there's a new re-engagement opportunity where opening documents can literally lead to re-engagement into your app to help a user get work done effectively. So I'm going to walk through a quick example of the new tab page. And you saw a piece of this during Joe's keynote yesterday. So I'm working on a set. And very easily, I can click on the plus to get to the new tab page. The new tab page has a lot of content related to Office because I'm an Office subscriber. You'll also notice that on the new tab page, there's information related to my organization. If you're in IT, your organization will have the capability of, through group policy, configuring aspects of the new tab page to help your users to be more effective, to get work done. Additionally, you'll notice under the search box, we will recommend on Windows frequently used app for the users, trying to help the user to get to what's next. We're making a guess based off of the apps that they typically engage in. But you're not limited to these app suggestions. A user can get access to any apps or content on the system they want to from the search box. So for the search box, as you can see here, I'm able to launch the Excel application, which is a line of business application. But that application could easily be your line of business application. And so with search on new tab page, there's a way for your users to easily discover and launch applications to help them to get work done. I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
You're able to search applications, any applications that's installed or only that's in progress?
I see. So the question I was just asked, can a user search for any application that is installed, or can a user only search for applications that are part of this set? The goal of the new tab page is to help the user to get to what's next, and that's not necessarily an element that's already in that set. And so from search, you can search through any installed applications on the system to get to what's next. It's a good question. Thank you. The other value proposition of sets is really helping your customers to pick up exactly where they left off in your app. And so in this example, I've opened up a document that relates to a task I need to get done. Windows prompts the user, would you like to restore the previous tabs, and shows kind of a glimpse of what are the different tabs that can be restored. These are things that were previously tabbed with my document. And by restoring these tabs, this basically provides me with the ability to re-engage in other related activities to creating that document. And one of those related activities could be a line of business app. In this case, it's an Excel app, but this could also be a line of business app that your customers use to get work done. So sets, you can think of it as in early beta today. It's a great way to stay organized. We shipped sets initially to a subset of insiders in December, and we're learning a lot from the insiders from feedback. It's not yet released to everyone, but we are scaling out sets to more and more insiders every day. We're super encouraged by what we see, and there's more coming, based off of the feedback that we're getting from users and from developers. We're going to continue to iterate on the solution with you to make the solution great. And as Joe mentioned yesterday, we are going to continue to invest in sets, and we will release it to everyone only when it's great, when we feel that it is great at solving the user problems of picking up where I left off and resuming work across all the devices that I own. Now, for most of you, there is no work required for your apps to have a basic experience with sets. But with some extra work, and you'll see what that extra work could be, there is potential for you to unlock much richer experiences for your customers that can lead to increased re-engagement and discovery of your apps when customers are trying to get work done with sets. We're going to kind of take you through a journey throughout the session of updating two sample apps from a basic experience with sets to a great experience. One of the apps is a UWP application, and one of those apps is a Win32 application, because we acknowledge that our customers use UWP applications and Win32. They're equally important to our platform. And so we'll walk you through that journey. The sample apps that we'll walk through today are going to be available on GitHub, and we'll have a link to the GitHub repo at the end of this session. So you'll be able to access the samples after the session. So let's start with multi-instancing. Multi-instancing is a feature that's available to any Win32 application today. And quite simply, it is the ability for a user to run multiple process instances of your application on their PC. There are tons of benefits for supporting this today from a productivity standpoint. If a user is super engaged in your application and they can find ways to use your application in different parallel work streams, multi-instance is suited for that. It enables those type of scenarios. With sets, there's even more value in enabling multi-instancing. Let me show you. So in this example, I have two sets open. One of the sets is related to activities to planning for travel to Seattle. And another set is related to activities, is actually a group of windows and activities that relate to a Tokyo trip that I'm planning. In each of these sets, I have different instances of Word open, but under different context. In one set, a Word document is open that relates to my Seattle trip. And in the other set, Word is open with a context that I'm planning for a Tokyo trip. I also have a trip app open in my Seattle trip set. But because the other set is related to trip travel as well, albeit a different trip, it makes sense for me to want to be able to tap the trip app with my second set too. So let's look at an example. Let's look at an example where let's say that the Trips app does not support multi-instancing, and then let's look at the user experience. I'm on the new tab page, and I launch the Trip app, and then something unexpected happens. I, as a user, am taken to the Trip app, but because the Trip app doesn't support multi-instancing, we switch focus to the existing running instance of Trip, which has the sort of jarring side effect of taking me to a different set, right? And this has accomplished the goal of taking the user to their desired activity, but has also taken that user out of context, out of the set that they were working on and into a new set. Let's look at an example of where we can make this experience, change it from basic to actually really good for the user. And so in this case, I'll run through the same steps. I'll run the Trips app, but this time the Trips app supports multi-instancing. And so what happens is when I launch the Trips app in the context of a set, a new instance of Trips gets launched and gets grouped with the right set of activities. And so this is a very good experience made possible through multi-instancing. As I sort of led this section with Win32 applications support multi-instancing today, and now so do UWP applications. That feature is available for the platform today. It's really easy to enable this in your application. It's simply a manifest update, and it's optional. We recommend it because it has a ton of value for users that are trying to get productivity done in multiple parallel sets. But you should be careful if your application today writes to resources on the disk, you need to make sure that you're serializing access to those resources before you turn on multi-instance. But for most of you, the work will be quite simple. It'll be simply just updating the manifest to support multi-instancing. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Raymond, and Raymond will do a quick demo of how you can enable multi-instancing in your apps.
Hi, I'm Raymond. So here is a copy of the Trips app that Jason's been showing off. And suppose I'm over here clicking on my Seattle trip, and here are my important things that I need to do. I need to pack my suitcase, go to the sets talk, get my own autograph, and then go visit the Fremont Troll. Meanwhile, I go back into timeline, and I see that, oh, I'm also planning a trip to London. But since right now this is a single instance UWP application, what it did is it took me out of my Seattle trip, and it transformed it into my London trip. So I lost what I was doing with my Seattle trip. So let's fix this problem. This is the application manifest file for the Trips app. I zoomed it up so we can all read it. It also means you can't see the top of it. Trust me, this is the whole thing. If we drop this new attribute that was added, it is supported in the April update that just went out. You can set supports multiple instances equals true. I'm going to hit F5. We're going to rebuild the Trips app and redeploy it. Of course, the ability to run multiple instances is something you're already used to doing with Win32 apps. Now we bring this ability to UWP applications. Even though the system will launch a new instance of the UWP application, you can still take advantage of some new APIs that we've added to let you adjust exactly how the new instance runs. You might decide that your application is very document-centric, and if the user is opening the document that is already running somewhere else, you don't want to open 2 copies of the document. You just want to switch to the existing one. So there are ways for your application to adjust how the multiple instancing works. So here we have my app again. It is hiding under my remote desktop thing. There it is. I'm going to go into my Seattle trip. Isn't that great? And then somebody asked me a question about my London trip, so I'm going to go and launch my London trip. And oh, my goodness, it's another window. How did that happen? That's just magic. So that was just a very quick look at it. There's plenty more to do with multi-instancing. Jason will be back to Jason to wrap things up.
So that was just a quick look of multi-instancing, and we believe that investing with a little bit of investment to enable multi-instancing in your UWP applications, that can take the experience for your users in terms of getting work done from basic to good. Now we're going to switch to investments you can make in your app to really make the experience pop for your users, to make the experience super rich and great. And we'll start by talking about user activities. And we'll start this section actually by describing a scenario that will probably be a very common scenario, and how you can make this a scenario really rich for your users through user activities. In this example, I have a set open. And again, we're back to planning for a Seattle trip. But I've made some progress. I've been engaging in Raymond's Trips app. And now I'm thinking about the things that I want to do in Seattle. And so in the Trips app, I am at the Seattle page. And I have also selected an item on my to-do list. But I get interrupted. I mean, this happens all the time. And so I close the set. But I, as a user, have confidence that with sets, I can easily get back to this set of activities at a later time. We're going to look at 2 examples. And in the first example, this is an example of sort of basic restore of sets. This is what happens by default on the system if you don't enlighten your app with user activities. So I open up a document related to my trip travel, and Windows prompts me, do I want to restore my previous tabs? And in this case, I had 1 previous tab. And when I look at the card for that tab, it's basically a trip app, and it gives me a visual indicator that relaunching this tab will take me back to the main window of the Trips app. So I click Restore Tabs, and the Trips app tab comes back, which is good in that it takes me back into the app. It brings back the app into my set. But it's not quite as rich as I would like, because it doesn't take me exactly where I left off in the experience with Trips app. And the second example, and this example is only possible by investment on your part. I will again launch the document that's related to my trip travel, and I get prompted to restore the previous tab. But something is different here. I look at the card that gets presented to me. This is the card that Windows is offering to restore as a tab in my set. And in this example, it's clear that from the card, I have the option to restore the Trips app, but specifically into the Seattle experience within the app. I click Restore Tabs, and the Trips app opens, but not at the main page. It opens right back at the Seattle page that I was looking at before I closed the set. And it even remembered to highlight the last to-do item that I checked off on my list. And this, from a customer perspective, this is sort of magical, right? All I had to do was close a set and then reopen an element of that set at a later point in time, and everything sort of came back just the way I left it. The key ingredient to making this magic happen for your customers is really something called user activities, which you might have heard a ton about last year, and you might have read some of the blog posts about how to invest in user activities in Timeline. But I'm going to do a quick recap of what a user activity is. A user activity is an object in the system that essentially conceptually represents an experience or an activity within an app that your user might engage in. It's composed of 3 elements, one being a deep link, which is basically a deep link into an experience within your app, metadata that relates to content within the activity that the activity represents, and also an adaptive card. And the adaptive card is super important. The adaptive card information essentially represents visually what it looks like to re-enter an activity within your app. And that visual representation of the activity can show up in different Windows surfaces, one of them being Timeline. And so in this example, you can see different cards presented to the user that represent activities they were engaged in the past. And these are essentially new entry points for users to re-engage into your applications. So it's super important for these adaptive cards to be inviting for your users, but also useful. The adaptive cards should indicate very clearly visually what activity that they're going to take the user to. The information in these adaptive cards are also used by the system to build cards when we restore tabs. So I'm going to walk you through sort of a recap of what is the way for apps to participate in Timeline through user activities, and then we'll talk about the additional incremental investment you can make for sets with user activities. To participate in Timeline, an application will essentially publish user activities to the local activity feed on a device that essentially represents what the user was engaged in your app. And your app will do this whenever the user context changes. A simple example would be if I'm in a news app and I'm looking at a particular article, I might publish a user activity to the activity feed, indicating that the user was looking at this article. And when the user switches to a different article or a different aspect of the news app, that's an opportunity for the application to publish a new user activity representing that user context has changed. These activities get published onto Timeline for a user. And the way they are shown in Timeline is through the adaptive cards that you define as part of your user activity. When a user clicks on an adaptive card that points to your activity, we take the associated deep link to essentially launch your application. But the real magic happens for the user when your application takes that deep link and deserializes the info in that deep link to take the user exactly where they were when they were working on that particular activity in your application. And that magic is only possible if you do work in your application to enable it. You can go further with sets, though. With incremental investment in sets, you can truly amplify your investment in user activities to create delightful, engaging experiences for your customers. You saw earlier how simply the act of opening a document that was previously tabbed with your application can lead to re-engagement within an activity in your application. That is only possible through investment from your side in your app to create rich user activities that can be used to take users back into the app contextually with the document. So essentially, there's an opportunity for your application to wait on request from the operating system for user activities. So for example, if a user decides to close a set, before the user decides to close a set, there's an opportunity for you to hand off a rich user activity to the system that can be then used to take the user back into that experience when they reopen the dock or reopen other elements of that set. And actually, I'm going to make one more point here. The activity feed is local, and so what that means is if I'm not connected, if I'm on a machine that's not connected to the internet, I get all the value of sets and timeline on my device. I can close a set and on the same device at some other point in time, reopen the set and get back to where I left off. But the activity feed also gets published into the Microsoft Graph. And what that enables is for a particular user that's logged in with an MSA, that user that's logged in with the same MSA on other devices that they own can see their timeline on other devices and can also see their sets on other devices. And so that makes the investments, your investments in user activities even more powerful. In fact, that will create opportunities to drive additional acquisitions or attach for your applications on other devices that your users own. So to recap, the goal of Timeline is really to help your customers to re-engage in activities in your app. An example of this would be reopening a document with your app or opening a music playlist with your app. But the goal of sets is a little bit more nuanced than that. The goal of sets is about helping your customers to pick up exactly where they left off within an activity in your app, providing that sort of magical experience of continuity, of being able to exactly and very precisely resume to an activity so that I can get work done the most efficiently as a user. And that is only possible, that customer experience is only possible with your work in your apps. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Raymond, and Raymond's going to show you how easy it is to make these sort of investments in your app to create these delightful, rich experiences.
Oh my goodness, that's so small. Let me disconnect and reconnect because nobody can see that. You're looking behind the curtain. You're looking at all my VMs. You're looking at the fact that I have almost no disk space left on this computer and it will keel over at any moment. You're listening to my internal monologue. So here, I'm back on my system. This particular user has been taking notes all through the build conference. We open the notes. My VM crashes because it's run out of disk space. Here we go. How much disk space do I have? I have 6 meg. That is not going to be enough. Why don't we move on? We'll get back to this demo in a little bit.
I could do that. All right. So the APIs that you will see Raymond demonstrate are available today in the Windows Insider SDK. Here's a link for more information. I'm not going to talk through the APIs. I'm going to allow Raymond to demonstrate how to use these APIs. But effectively, the APIs are what enables you to ask Windows to request for user activities from your app. And then that gives you the opportunity to hand off very rich activities where the system can contextually relate those to other elements in the set to enable the magical, rich, pick up where you left off experiences that your customers desire. Yes?
So when I tell the activity feed I'm doing an activity, it knows it's happening in a set. I don't need to tell it.
Let me repeat the question. So the question is, if I have an application and it writes a user activity to the activity feed, do I have to do anything extra to correlate that activity with other activities in a set? And the answer is no. The system actually takes care of this for you. As Raymond gets set up, and because we have time for Q&A, I'll provide a little bit more context. So in the examples I showed before, I showed a basic experience, and then I showed the great experience, which requires a little a little bit of extra work from your side to enable that sort of magical experience for the customer. The basic experience, the apps didn't have to do anything to participate, right? So somehow the system knew that in the past with this document, I had this application, maybe this web page, maybe this other application that was previously grouped together by the user. And for this system, this is an implicit signal that, hey, this was an intentional thing from the user to group these things together. This must be a set. And so it's an implicit signal that we use to say these things are related. The way we sort of define the elements in the set in the system, we basically have user activities for each element, and then we have a construct on top of that where we represent these collection of activities as a set. For apps that don't participate explicitly, they don't provide rich user activities, we'll create a user activity on their behalf, but the kind of activity we'll create will be very basic. It's sort of, we know that this application was part of a set, so the deep link aspect of the user activity is essentially just an app launch URI for that app. But that's not as rich as what you can provide, because only you know what experiences your applications were engaged in, what experiences your users were engaged in your application. And so that's where the real opportunity comes for you to make that experience much richer for your customers. How are we doing, Raymond?
No, you just keep going. Man.
All right.
I'm deleting scenarios off this machine right now.
All right. Can we do the window grouping?
Catastrophic failure. Well, that's really effective.
That didn't sound good. I'm just going to talk.
You just keep talking.
So in the keynote yesterday, or if you stopped by our booth, you probably saw some demos where, well, actually the Mail app would be a good example. So if I'm in Outlook or Mail, I create new windows, and these windows get automatically grouped. I think we've shown some demos where windows are just getting automatically grouped. And that's another way of saying the system is, by default, sort of helping users to curate a set, right? But I'm here to say that your apps have full control over window grouping behavior for windows you create and for applications you launch. Why? Because you know your customers the best, you know the intent of your application the best, and you know what your customers' expectations are the best. And so what that means is, for example, if you have a scenario in your app where literally the feature is to create a window and to reposition it side by side, there was an earlier session today, I believe, where we talked about new APIs in UWP platform where you can now position windows relative to each other. Clearly, in that case, that's an example of where you wouldn't want to automatically group the windows because the actual value add of the feature is to show windows side by side. But on the flip side, your app might support web invocations. And if from your application, there's an option for a user to launch a web page, and that relates to services that you provide that enhance the value of your app. These are probably things you want to group automatically with your app window, right? So that's a different example. But the end message is you're in control of how windows get grouped when your app creates new windows and when you launch apps. And
all right, we're just going to do this all with Notepad. Because Notepad has line feeds now, so it's awesome. All right, so what was I supposed to be talking about? I'm supposed to be talking about user activities. Remember user activities? He talked about them like 20 slides ago. So this is code in the Trips application that runs when the user navigates to the application's homepage. User activities were introduced. We announced them back in build last year, and they began to be supported in the fall update from last year. So I don't blame you if you've sort of forgotten. We'll do a quick recap of this. This is code that I should have written in my app, but I didn't, so I'm doing a little bit of catch up. So the first thing we do when the user goes to the homepage of our application is we generate a user activity that says that the user is looking at the trip overview page. We get the user activity channel. This gives us access to the activity feed. On this channel, we get or create a user activity with a specific name that we call home. Activity IDs are completely up to you. You can format them any way you like. The system doesn't pay any attention to what they are, aside from the fact that they will they will produce them again if you ask them for them by the same name. In this case, I've decided to call the activity for looking at my overview of trips home. We get that activity or create it if necessary. We set up an activation URI. This is where the magic happens. This is where you set the URI that the system is going to invoke in order to resume this activity. In my case, I set the URI to be a specific protocol that I've registered with this application. And then I use the activity ID again as the payload. I set some display text for this activity so it shows up nicely, trips overview. But to make it look super nice, I can create an adaptive card for this activity. This adaptive card allows me to generate a rich, beautiful, enticing way for the user to come back, recognize what this card represents, and resume the activity. This particular code uses an adaptive card library available on NuGet called, surprisingly, adaptive cards. But really, all this is an object modeler around the underlying JSON schema. So at the end of the day, you can generate your adaptive cards using whatever JSON library you like. Let's see if I can find one here. I have a Notepad. Look at Notepad. Notepad's doing heavy lifting today. So this is what the adaptive card actually looks like. It's just a bunch of JSON. If we say, hey, I have a background image. I have 2 lines of text. The first line I want to be larger and bolder. You cannot see my pointy thing. There we go. The first line of text I want to be larger and bolder. The second line of text just says I have 2 trips. And that's all there is in it. After I set up my activity, I save it to the activity feed. And then I start the session. Starting the session is what tells the system that the user is currently engaged in this activity. This allows the activity to be promoted on timeline. When the user navigates away from my page, I dispose the session, and that tells the system the user is no longer on my application's home page. So this is the code that you could be writing and shipping today that publishes activities into timeline to allow the user to return to what they were doing in a more effective manner. But the next step is to take advantage of the new functionality that was added in the April update. Hey, that's my start menu. All right, let's do this again. Format, font. What would be a good font? We'll do Consolas. All right. So the trips page, this is the page that describes a particular trip. In this case, it would talk about my Seattle trip, for example. When we go on this page, we do pretty much the same thing as before. We generate a user activity that says the user is looking at this particular trip. In this case, my activity ID, I say we're on a trip. This is the trip ID. We do the same as before. We create an activity for it. We set up a URL for the system to invoke to bring us back. We fill in the adaptive card. We set up some visual elements. We save it to the channel. We start a session. This lets the system know that the user is currently looking at their Seattle trip. The new piece here that just shipped in April is the Activity Request Manager. You can ask for the Activity Request Manager for this view and register on the User Activity Requested event. This event is raised by the system when the system thinks now would be a great time for your application to provide highly detailed information about what the user is doing right now. So in this sample program, in response to the request for the activity, we take a look at the to-do list, pull out the item that the user is currently looking at in their to-do list, encode that in the activity ID and in the URI, so that way now when the system restores this activity, in addition to getting the trip ID, we also told it to give us the item on the to-do list to restore into. We fill out an adaptive card. This is all the same. At the end, we finally respond to the request by saying, this is the user activity that represents what the user is doing right now. And so this is the last piece that lights up the sets and the restore scenario in sets that allows the user to restore directly into their application right where they were. Now, I know a lot of you are Win32 programmers, so let's go take a look at the Win32 version of this. I'm trying to type and talk. I don't even remember, channel. That would be a good thing to search for. Win32 applications can also consume objects from the Windows runtime. And so in fact, the code for generating activities and publishing them into the activity feed is identical. We do what we did before. We get the channel, we create an activity on it, we fill in information about the activity, we save it, and then we create a session. There's a little wrinkle here in that Win32 operates with Windows rather than UWP views. And so the method is create session for window rather than create session, and you pass in your window handle. But aside from that, this code is the same as the code that you had in your UWP application. Similarly, the code for listening to requests to generate specific activities is the same, except that instead of saying get user activity request manager get for current view, we say get for window, and you pass in your window handle. But the event itself is the same, and you handle the event the same way. In the Books app, we remember how many pages into the book the user has managed to read, and remember that position in the URL that we ask to be used to launch us back. And I'll take a quick look at the code that actually does the invoke. This code is also pretty much the same between the Win32 and UWP applications. When the application is launched, it takes a look at its command line, parses it, and says, oh my goodness, the command line is this URI scheme that I registered. Let me parse it out. If the name of the page that I recorded in this URI is book, then I'm going to go to a specific book. I'm going to go to my little book viewer. The book viewer takes the URL, does a little C# parsing magic to fish out the parameters that we encoded, and then remembers and finds the book that was encoded in the URL, and finds the scroll position that was encoded in the URL. Whoops. Then when the window is ready, we find the scroll viewer and scroll right to that position. So this shows how UWP and Win32 applications can light up the sets scenarios by publishing activities into the activity feed and then publishing specific activities upon request, so that way the set can be restored with maximum fidelity. Well, have Jason talk for a while I figure out what's going on.
So I'm going to context switch you back into controlling window grouping. So we just talked about the benefits of making sure that you are in control of your customer experience. If you have a strong point of view as to whether specific windows you create are grouped or not, if you have a strong point of view as to whether or not apps that you launch should be grouped or not, based off of the intended customer experience, then you have the tools available to stay in control. Raymond will do a demo to show you how easy this is for UWP and Win32 applications. But before we move into that demo, I'll just say a quick trailer. The APIs you'll see in the demo are coming soon, really soon, actually, in Windows Insider SDK. So stay tuned. And
all right.
the other thing
sorry. I thought you were throwing to me. We rehearsed this. All right, back.
We're going to go back in time.
Oh, you're on my slide. Oh, that's great. On to 8.
Yes.
So I was going to show off my awesome demo app, except that since the VM doesn't run, you'll just have to imagine that this app is totally awesome. I wrote it in a week. It's got jokes galore. It's just hilarious. But I can't tell them now. Sorry. You'll have more time for lunch. In the sample application, we had 2 kinds of links. One of them was when you're on a trip, it has a link to flight tracking information. This is the sort of information that you would want to be part of the overall trip planning activity, the overall trip planning task that the user is engaged in. And so it makes sense for the flight status web page to be part of the same set. The code that we have to open to launch a web page is the function launch URI async. And the way we specify that we would like this particular web page to open as part of the same set is that we set a new property that's available that we're adding called grouping preference. And we say that the grouping preference is with source. And this says that we would like the application being launched to be part of the same set as the application doing the launching. On the other hand, the Trips application also had some advertising in it, because monetization is important to our livelihood, because otherwise we can't go on trips. In this case, we're launching an ad for the Microsoft Surface because, hey, you know, Microsoft Surface, it's our thing. If only they had more disk space. In this case, again, we launch the URI in the usual way, but we specify a grouping preference of separate to indicate that we want this particular window to open in a new set. And so this is a very simple way, with the setting of one new property, you can control how other applications that you launch from your application either are continuation of the overall task that the user is performing or is starting a new type of activity. The grouping preference has also been added to launch file async and launch folder async. So whatever type of thing you're launching from your UWP application, you can control how it groups. For Win32 applications, it's the same but different, because Win32 is always the same and different. In my hilarious sample application, there was a button to launch Notepad, because Notepad's the star of the show, and I just wanted to make sure that every app can launch Notepad. So here's the function that I use to launch Notepad. We set up this new thing called a grouping preference site, which we will dig into. In Win32, the shell execute function takes a site, which is a way for the application that is calling shell execute to provide additional information to the system to control how the launch takes place. It looks really strange calling shell execute from C#, but I managed to do it in only one screen full. And that's because I put all the horrible p invokes over in the shell interop namespace, which I'm not showing you. Don't worry, you can clone the repo and look at it. It's all in there. All the interfaces are declared. They've all got the right GUIDs on them. You can just take the code and go. But the idea here is that we specify that we have a particular site. This site specifies that it has a particular grouping preference and an associated window. There are two kinds of grouping preferences for Win32. If you want to open it in a new tab, you can specify a grouping preference of tab with associated window. Otherwise, if you want to open in a new window, you can say that you want your grouping preference to be a new tab group. If you are group opening in a new tab, then when you set the associated window, I'm going to jump around again, I'm sorry. You can also set the associated window property to say that this is the window that's doing the launching. I want the new window to be part of the same set as this other window. And then right above it here is the grouping preference site itself. You're perfectly welcome to steal this. When we constructed it, we remembered the grouping preferences at construction. The system asks us, hey, do you want to be somebody who alters the launch UI context? And we say, yes, we would certainly like to do that. Then the system says, OK, here you go. And so we set our grouping preference to one of those two values, saying, I would like this other guy that I'm launching to be part of my set, or to start a new set. And in the case where I'm asking the other window to be part of a set, you have to pass the associated window, which tells which set you want that new window to be part of. But we're Win32, so we like to create windows, because that's what Win32 is all about. If you took create window out of Win32, everybody would cry. And so here's the code that we use to apply grouping behavior to windows that we created ourselves, rather than windows that we are launching because we handed them off to shell execute. In the case where the application decides that it doesn't want to customize the grouping behavior, you just do nothing, and you will get some system-determined default behavior. If you want to force a new group, you can set a new DWM attribute called tab grouping preference, and you pass that same grouping preference value that we saw in the previous file. The new tab group, if you specify that you want a new tab group, then you set your window attribute to my grouping preference is new tab group, and then this window will appear as a new set. On the other hand, if you want to join an existing group, you set your preference to tab with associated window, and then you specify the associated window to be presumably your own window, so the system knows that we are the new window. In this case, you set the associated window to some other window in your application that you would like this new window to be joined with as part of a set. It is important that you set these properties before you show your window, because it is at the time you show the window that the system decides which set the window goes into. So if you're a Win32 person, you can do this in, say, NC create or WM create. Just get it in before the show window happens. So that's a quick look at controlling grouping preferences, both for UWP, launching other things, or in Win32, either launching other things through shell execute or creating new windows on your own and customizing their grouping with DWM attributes. I'm going to throw back to Jason to pick up wherever he left off.
This is going to be a recurring theme. So Raymond just showed you how you can take full control over how windows that you create gets grouped with your application. So you might already be asking yourselves, well, what happens to my application today in terms of grouping? Today and tomorrow, users will have the ability to control the default preference for whether windows that are created by apps get grouped or not. Right? So users can express a preference in settings, and that is the default behavior, assuming that applications don't do something special to say, I have a specific grouping preference. And so I'll walk you through a couple quick examples. Let's say that a user has expressed a preference in settings to not group windows by default. And so in this case, I have launched the Mail app, and the Mail app is unmodified. It does not express explicit grouping preferences for windows it creates. And so I decide to pop open a mail, and that mail pops open in a new separate window. The mail window still has a tab, so if I want as a user, I can explicitly drag and drop these things together to explicitly express that this is a set. These things belong together. But by default, the system doesn't do that automatically. And when I click on an attachment in the mail, this basically causes another application launch, Notepad, and that attachment is open in a separate window. And so because the user has expressed a preference, by default, I don't want to group windows automatically. These windows essentially are created separate from each other, just as they're created today. Your customers might also express a different preference, which is to automatically group windows together. And so in this case, I'll run through the same steps, but the experience is a little bit different. When I try to pop open the mail window, that window gets grouped with the source window because the customer or the user has expressed a preference to automatically group things. If I launch the attachment with Notepad, that Notepad window also gets automatically grouped. And so this behavior happens if the setting that I showed you earlier is set to automatically group windows. So the user can express a preference, but again, you're in control, and so depending upon what the user expectations are for your app, whenever you create windows, you can override the system default preference. Okay, so now I'm going to switch to app visuals because I'm certain many of you are wondering, all right, so in a sets world, what does this mean in terms of visuals for my application? And I'll start by talking about the tab visuals. The tab icon is probably the first thing I tend to get asked in terms of what does sets mean for my app in terms of visuals. The tab icon is something you already provide today. It's essentially an icon you provide that shows up on other Windows surfaces like taskbar. We essentially take that icon and just repurpose it for the tab as well. And here's an example. The Photos app, you can see that the icon in the tab matches the icon that's used in the taskbar. Tab callers are also important, And we provide apps with the ability to control the foreground and background colors in their tab when their window is in focus by the user. When the window is not in focus by the user, then we revert system theme colors. And this is intentional. This is to help your customers, your users, to be able to easily distinguish between tabs, i.e. windows that are in focus, versus windows and tabs that are not in focus. Actually, I will make one more point. Controlling tab colors is really interesting for two primary reasons for you. One being branding, right? So if you have a brand, the ability to express that brand in the tab can help sort of differentiate that tab from other tabs in the system. And it just sort of reinforces your brand. And so there's an opportunity, if you have a brand color, to reflect that in the tab. The other opportunity is to really make that tab feel more connective or native to your app. And so being able to visually connect the tab with your app is also super important to deliver a delightful experience for your users when they engage with your app, just from a polished perspective. So in this example, I'm going to look at the OneNote app. And in the OneNote app, you can see that the tab is branded purple, and it also feels visually connected with the rest of the app. The OneNote window is currently in focus, but when I click on the Trips app and bring the Trips app into focus, you can see that the OneNote tab is no longer branded. The colors now are controlled by the system. And this is to help the user to visually understand that the OneNote window is no longer in focus. And here's an example where I've switched the system theme to dark theme. And you can see that all of the inactive tabs, doesn't matter if the tab is selected or not, reflects the system theme. But when I click on the OneNote window, now the OneNote window is back in the foreground. It's back in focus by the user. And so now the app is back in control in terms of the colors in the tab. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to Raymond, who will walk through an example of customizing tab colors.
All right, so I have no awesome apps to run. I'm just going to be running Notepad all day. So this is the code in the Trips app that sets the lovely, soothing teal color in the title bar. This is the code that's running in the application today, running on systems that are already out there in market. This is the way you set your title bar colors in UWP. We get the title bar for the current view. We calculate some of our very carefully chosen by marketing branding colors. And we set those colors into our title bar to adjust all the colors that appear in the title bar, so that way it is coherent with the rest of the colors in our application. The changes that you need to make to get this to light up the colors in your tab is absolutely nothing. This code also works at colorizing your tab. Similarly, as Jason noted, you don't have to do anything to get your application's icon to appear in your tab. We'll pick it up automatically from the taskbar. And the taskbar picked it up from your application manifest, and you have to put an icon in your application manifest, or the store gets mad at you. For Win32 applications, Win32 doesn't really have an existing way to declare to the system what your title bar colors are, so we need a little help. In the sample app, hiding in the ComInterop namespace is a method called getTitleBar for window. This does a little ComInterop magic to go fish out an application view title bar object that corresponds to your Win32 window. You can then customize the colors of that title bar as if it were a UWP title bar. So we set its background and foreground colors according to the beautiful, bold, assertive blue color of the Books app that you can't see on the screen. So that's basically all you need to do to customize the appearance of your tab. We have the colors. The colors for UWP applications come from the code that you already have to customize your title bar. For Win32 applications, you can do this little bit of interop work to get access to a Windows runtime title bar and customize its colors. Oh, and the icon for your tab for your Win32 app is, again, just comes from the icon for your window. It is the same icon that we show on the taskbar. And with that, since that's my last demo, I'm going to curl up under this table into a fetal position.
It's OK, Raymond. I mean, that was pretty impressive recovery. All right, so as Raymond showed to you, if you have a UWP app, customizing the tab collars for that app is as simple as using the existing title bar colorization API. In fact, if you already customize the title bar today, your tab will already reflect those colors today on a build with sets turned on. For Win32 apps, we provide a new API. Raymond has just walked through it. You'll have access to the sample code at the end of the session from the links in the resources slide. And that API will also be coming soon, probably this summer. So stay tuned. OK, so the last topic that I have for app visuals is back button. We have new guidance for integrating back button into your app. And that's essentially to use an in-app back button. This is different from guidance that we have provided in the past. But that guidance has evolved to really help developers to create a more consistent back experience across different modalities on desktop. I'm running in tablet mode. I'm running a window with a tab on it. I'm running a window without a tab on it. The back experience should be consistent across all those, but also across devices. And I'm going to take a moment to acknowledge that most of you probably already do this today. Most of you probably already implement an in-app back button, because what we've heard from you is that for your customers, it is important to have a consistent back experience across all the devices that your customers care about, including Windows and Android and iOS. And having that experience be consistent across all is important. And so for most of you, this guidance might not be applicable. But for some of you, I'll have two additional points to make. One being, if you use System Back today, it will continue to work with sets or without sets. And then the second is, please consider looking at the guidance. We think that from a user point of view, following the new guidance will actually help set you up and your customers up better for success in the future as we think about back experiences across other devices and potentially new devices that ship in the future. And I will close on that topic with just a quick screenshot. So all of the inbox apps in Windows are moving to the new guidance, and they will be integrating an in-app back button in the apps. And in this example, you can see that the Photos app has an integrated in-app back button. So looking forward, we've had sets out for a while, and we've been getting a ton of feedback from our customers, both just normal users and developers. And one of the pieces of feedback that we've heard is from developers, can I have more control over my tabs? And just one example of that is, let's say my app has other experiences that my user might frequently engage in. Help me to provision those as tabs, but help me to provision those as background tabs, just to sort of get ready and make it easy for a customer to switch to those experiences, but don't switch focus away from the main window. I just want to get these tabs set up for when my user is ready to engage on those other activities. And so that's one of the pieces of feedback we've heard, and that's something that we're exploring for sets. Another question that we've been asked is, can I make the new tab page more contextual to my app? And I'll give you a couple examples. If I'm coming from console, we've heard this from the console crowd. When I click on the plus, go to the new tab page, can the new tab page more accurately sort of reflect what my intent is because I just left from console? So is there opportunity to do something more contextual on new tab page to help me to get to what's next, using as a signal that I just came from console? The same question applies to essentially any line of business app. If I'm a line of business app focused on finances and I click on the plus, is there opportunity for the developer to influence content on the new tab page to help the user to get to what's next in the context of I just came from a finance app? So that's something that we are investigating and looking into as future new opportunities that we unlock for both developers and our customers. Can I customize my tabs more? Great, so we just showed you how you can colorize the tab, and we just showed you how easy it is to get an icon because we use the icon you've already provided to us. Can I do more with the tabs? Examples would be like interactive badges. That's sort of an obvious one. In the browser today, I can see a badge for when audio is playing. Can I have something similar for apps because it might be a media player app? That's just one example. I've heard other examples too, and that is another area that we're investigating as sort of what's possibly next for sets. And then finally, can I participate without having to remove any of my title bar customizations? Right? So there was a reason for me to invest in these customizations in the past. Is there a path forward for me to participate without having to sort of remove those customizations and push that back into the client area of my app? Mainly because that is potentially less friction for me to participate. And I want to participate because I want to have access to those re-engagement opportunities that apps that participate in sets have access to. That's another area we are definitely looking into and exploring as possible future for sets. So these are examples of things that we're exploring based off of the feedback we've heard from developers since December. But I'm sure, we're confident that there are opportunities we haven't thought of that you might already be thinking of right now, or you might think about maybe next week or the week after as you digest all of the information that you've heard from Build. And we want to hear that feedback. One of the ways you can give us feedback is actually quite literally built into Windows. And so there's an app called the Feedback Hub app. That's a really great way to give us feedback. If you have other channels, please use that. Social is another channel. But however you provide that feedback to us, we definitely want to hear it because we know and we acknowledge, and I hope the message comes across from this session that the best user experiences, the magical user experiences are only possible if you invest. We can provide basic user value, which is still user value and still important, but the best user value and the best magical experiences are only possible through the work that you do in your apps, because you know your customers the best, and you know your app the best. So as a quick recap, what is the opportunity for you with sets? At a basic level, it's about increasing delight and engagement with your customers by helping them to solve the problem of just picking up very easily, picking up on work within activities in your app. So helping them to pick up where they left off. Traditionally, we have thought about Windows as really tied to a PC. And so, like I say, 10, 15 years ago, we think about how does a user get work done? And there's typically a PC that might be on the side, sort of dedicated for getting work done. And then when I'm done with my work, I'll go here and do different things. But that is not how people work today. Typically, a user, a normal person, we'll just say a human person, will start work on one device that they own, and it might be a tablet, it might be a phone, it might be a PC, a device, but that work doesn't necessarily end there. The user will typically move to another device, and they will typically want to move to another device that makes it easy for them to get work done at a different location under a different context. And so moving between devices to basically get work done is a modern workflow. And so we see Windows as evolving as really helping to integrate user experiences across all the devices that they own. And therefore, we also see sets as an opportunity for you to inject your apps into that modern workflow. So the calls to action are really, today, take advantage of multi-instancing, supercharge your apps with user activities, validate the window grouping behavior in your apps and the tab visuals in your apps, and, if necessary, create small fixes to make them the best for your customers. And finally, if it's applicable to you, to adopt the new in-app back button guidance. And most importantly, give us feedback. Keep us honest, keep us on that path of delivering a version of sets that is great for our users, our shared users, and also great for you. We've got a slide here with a bunch of resources. I'll just highlight all the sample code that Raymond walked through in Notepad today are available on GitHub, and you can access the code from GitHub. Get access to build the sets, and you can run and see the things we're hoping to show you today. And we're excited to get feedback on that, too. And then finally, I'll close with, we have a few more Fluent sessions that are still available today, so I would invite you to attend one or even more of those sessions after this session. And so with that, I'm going to leave the slide up and just kind of open it up for questions. Thank you.
I've got a question for you guys. I've got a multi-windowing Win32 app. So I'm a product manager, so I'm not a Windows programmer, so I might misuse terms here. So it's a multi-windowing app, but it's not a multi-instance app. there are windows.
I'm actually having a little bit of trouble hearing from the stage, so maybe if you can speak a little bit louder.
So is this a UWP app or a Win32 app?
It's a Win32 app,
Okay.
and it has multiple windows already,
But all in the same process.
all in the same process because there's a cache that it's running that makes it hard to share. Is there a way, though, of opening its own windows into a set deliberately, and giving a URI as a user activity, where it could say, yes, you want me to be open, and yes, the app that's originally opened might be in one particular set, but it might have a window that's been dragged into another set, or that it's opened in another set. Is that possible?
I'm still trying to understand the scenario. So you have an application, it creates multiple windows, but it's only one process.
Yes.
You created an activity,
Yes.
and then the user launched that activity. The system is going to run your application with create process, probably. You can then recognize as, oh my goodness, I've already got a copy of me running. And you can just hand the activation to the previous.
But I know which window you're asking for. Because each of my windows has a reason for existing.
Right. And so the activity, presumably, you've encoded in the URL parameter of the activity what this activity represents. Like this is, I'm going back to document 3.
And I happen to know that
document 3 is already
open
there.
in that window over there.
In
So I
which
could
case,
just make it forward.
you can just like set focus to that window. It's like, I just did it.
Yeah, will that work?
Sure.
Okay, cool.
It just works, man.
Hi.
Hi. First question I have is about the taskbar. I was using the sets insider preview, and I found it a little jarring that the sets don't correlate well to where the things are on the taskbar. Is that something you're thinking about?
Yes. So I had a slide previously where we talked about feedback questions we're getting from developers. From users, that has certainly bubbled near the top. It's clear that there's investments we're making in terms of being able to switch between activities with sets that aren't necessarily, I won't say necessarily, that aren't reflected in the taskbar well today. And so it is our point of view that that really there should be a more consistent experience across windows when we think about how we express sets and how users interact with sets. So that's definitely an area that we're investing. I'll say that sort of V1 of sort of how do we start addressing this is around the Alt-Tab investments. And I don't know if you remember from the keynote, but helping to switch between activities and sets with Alt-Tab. Now you can switch between individual web tabs. That was informed by like, that was sort of an effort to sort of help address a little bit of that problem, but clearly we aren't all the way there. And so the short answer is yes. We've heard customer feedback loud and clear. That's absolutely a place that we plan to invest. It's more than an exploration.
Thanks. And my second question is, what exactly is the state of set support for Win32? Is it like every Win32 app can get it, or you have to opt into it? Like obviously there's a lot of customization they can do, so it's
So we invite all Win32 apps to participate. I'll say where it makes sense. And so the constraints we have, which aren't specific to Win32, we'll just say for any application is there's certain things you must support in order to be able to participate. One of them being you should be able to minimize, maximize, resize. Because when you're part of a set, and let's say your window is not in focus, but some other window is, when somebody maximizes or resizes that window, all the other windows should support that too, right? And so there's that sort of base requirement. But then going specifically to Win32, beyond the sort of base requirement of supporting these sort of window management operations, the requirement right now is really, if you're a Win32 application, don't customize the title bar to participate. I'm going to bring up a specific example because we have a very prominent example that we showed at Keynote, Office, that does customize the title bar, right? So we have Win32 Office. Today, if you are an Office Insider and you're running Office Insider builds on a Windows Insider build with sets enabled, you will see tabs in Office. How do they do that? Because if you run the same code on another machine, there's no tabs and they customize the title bar. The guidance for apps that do customize the title bars is essentially check via new API that we have available. If you go to one of the doc links, you'll see it. Check to see if sets is enabled on the system And if it is, and if you want to participate in those re-engagement opportunities that Sets offers, then basically move the custom content from your title bar into the client area of your app, and that will enable the system to basically throw a tab and enable that thing to be tabbed and grouped with other windows. And so that's the guidance. For a lot of apps, in particular line of business apps, if you don't customize the title bar, as I mentioned before, you already participate with a basic experience, but then now there's sort of richer opportunity for you to enhance that experience for your customers.
But you don't have to actively do anything. Like the system can automatically detect that the title bar is not being customized.
So for the basic experience where you just get a tab and you can be grouped, and the system can relaunch you to basically regroup you with previous tabs, you don't have to do anything if you don't customize the title bar, and you support things like window resize, maximize, minimize.
Thank you.
Sure. You're welcome. Thank you.
Hey, very cool, thank you. Loads of questions. I'll go with the top two. You said right at the beginning that not all insiders are getting the bits.
That's right.
Is there a way of opting into that so that I can get started on this?
We are
next
thinking
week?
through, my answer is going to be twofold. So we're thinking through, now that Sets is becoming more available to insiders, and we're also educating you on how you can basically make investments to make your app shine with Sets. Like how do we make this easier, in particular for developers and OEMs, to get sort of earlier access. So that I'll say, I don't have a clear-cut answer right now, but expect an answer soon from my team on what that story is. In general, we do want to have like segmented population using Sets and not, so that we can make sure that in terms of like the goals that we have, driving up user engagement, making sure we're actually solving the problem that we set out to solve, making sure that we're not introducing other problems, it's important for us to be able to experiment with that and make sure that we're on the right path.
Sure.
But that being said, I think our point of view is there should be an exception for developers now that we're making ask of you, and there should be an exception for OEMs because they are also developers.
That's exactly my point. Okay,
Yeah.
and then the second question, again, I'm coming from a Win32 environment. Are there C++ WinRT bindings for all of the APIs that you've shown us today? Everything you've shown was C#.
I would defer to Raymond.
Yeah, so what you can do is when an SDK comes out that supports the new Windows, that has the new grouping preference, for example, you can take the WinMD from the SDK and run it through the program that converts WinMDs into CPP WinRT header files.
Yeah.
And they will come out and they will work.
Okay, cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do these grouping preferences work for PWA apps as well?
I don't know. I just learned about the letters PWA yesterday.
I'll answer a different way. So yes, Raymond is correct. Our focus has been UWP and Win32 applications. When we look at sort of the existing, I'll say, the existing opportunity of apps that already exist today, the vast majority are going to be UWP or actually, the vast majority is Win32. And so that's sort of where we prioritized our focus. PWAs are super important, and I think if you attended other sessions at this conference, you will understand that we acknowledge it's super important, and it is a big part of our future. And so I'll say my trailer would be, we will definitely have an answer for PWAs. And actually, there are some PWAs we've had in-house that actually get the tab because they're packaged as a UWP. So that's actually one definite path that you can have. So if you publish a PWA through the store, it will definitely get the tab. We're actually testing this internally. But there's a broader question of if I'm not in the store, I think will I get the tab? I think the more clear-cut answer will come later after build from
I guess the other question, like some of the new APIs, like you invoke those through JavaScript and PWAs, and a lot of the universal apps are available, APIs are available through JavaScript to them. So I just wanted to know if these were planning to be available through JavaScript.
Oh yes, all of the Windows runtime functions are available in all languages. Okay. So you'll certainly be able to set the property. We're just not sure if it'll work. But I think the answer is we need to make it work.
Thank you. It's a good question. Thank you.
I guess my curiosity is semi-related in that the tabs obviously look very similar to Edge's tabs, and so one of the obvious user questions is if it will also support the tab previews, the expanded tabs.
That is something we're definitely exploring. So if you have strong feedback or point of view, please send us feedback.
Okay.
But it is something we are discussing. Yeah.
So does each new tab just create a new instance? If I have an app, if I try create a new tab of my app, would it just create a new instance?
Yeah. So we.
Well, first of all, it depends what kind of app.
So if I have a UWP app,
Okay.
and I've activated multi-instance, and I click new tab, and then I open that app again, say it was my first app, my first tab, would it just create 2 instances?
If you set yourself up as a multi-instance app, and the way you have a button in your app called like open a new tab.
Yeah.
Yeah. If the way you create that new tab is to call launch URI async on yourself, then that will create a new instance of your app.
So how do I do it without creating a new instance? How does Edge do it? Because
Okay.
currently,
There is
yeah.
yes. So the question was how does Edge do it? Because Edge manages it all in one process, and that's because prior to the introduction of multi-instance, there is still pre-existing support in the Windows runtime for UWP applications to create multiple windows. It is rather complicated, and we took a look at the apps submitted to the store, and approximately 0 apps take advantage of it. But there is you can call create new view and show a standalone to create multiple windows within a single process in UWP. But the fact that the uptake of this particular functionality is extremely low led us to say, okay, what is the problem? Because the problem is clearly not nobody likes multiple windows. The problem was more clearly creating multiple windows is too hard, and so that's why one of the pieces of impetus to do the multi-instancing to get it easier.
Yeah, I was creating a tab control using a single frame with multiple navigation states. And so if I switch tabs, I would just load in a new state into that frame.
Right.
Now you're kind of screwing me up here. So if my app is pretty heavy and it's going to take up, a gig of RAM, and now you're going to create a new instance that's 2 gigs of RAM, a new instance 3 gigs of RAM. So I want to still be able to have tabs experience, but
Right.
using one process.
Yes,
And I'd love to be able to just hook back up into the project sets. And I'm wondering if there's any plans to allow me to, within a one grouping, use a single instance, but still use that
Yes.
state?
I understand the question, and the answer is the APIs for that shipped back in Windows 10 RTM. It's just that very few people have discovered them. There are APIs for creating. What you would do is you would create a new view for your app, and each of those views would show up as a tab in a set. And then you can put your content in each of those views and basically let the views represent tabs.
Got it.
So for example, in the Mail app, you saw that when I popped out a Mail window, that wasn't a new instance. I think I just got cut off.
Right.
That was a new view in the Mail app. But as Raymond mentioned, we've heard feedback that for a lot of apps that are in the store for UWP, really the only reason I would create another view is to create another sort of instance of the same window. That's a lot of work. And so I don't do it. But with multi-instance, if that's really what you're trying to do, that provides a really super cheap way for you to create multiple instances of the same window, except they happen to be in separate process instances.
Got it. Okay, great.
Yep. Thank you.
Hi, so my first question is from user side of view. When I'm multitasking, I'm working on something. I have 3 monitors, and I obviously want my windows to be side by side to see all of them. Is it possible to make separate windows part of the same set so they could be reopened at the same time?
Yeah, so earlier there's a question on, are you guys thinking about making the taskbar more consistent to sets? And I talked about feedback is bubbled up. Yes, we're on. I'll say for this one in particular, even more so. And so the feedback we're hearing loud and clear is from users, actually users and developers, is yeah, I totally get the value of getting back to Windows in a set, but the way I typically work, because I have monitors, or a high-res monitor with a lot of real estate, effective real estate, my set actually, the set that I want to go back to is Windows side by side. So we've heard the feedback. We are definitely exploring ways to address the feedback, and one of the first things I think I sort of hinted at but didn't talk explicitly about in one of the slides is the ability to kind of restore side-by-side windows. So I think V1, one of the things we're exploring, an idea we're exploring, which is, can we use as sort of a hint that this window belongs in the set? If I drag an existing tab that was part of a set, and then snap it adjacent to that, and then I snap maybe the rest of the tabs to a different part of the monitor. That should be a pretty strong signal that that user actually intends to work with this window side by side, and so that should still be part of a set. And so we're thinking about like what would that mean in terms of the user experience, and can we deliver on the benefit that you're really asking for? The other is maybe I didn't drag the window from a set of group windows, but I just snapped windows. I'm clearly engaged. I clearly snapped there in focus. I'm engaged with these windows. Can't that be a strong signal that this is a set? So these are the examples of things that we're thinking about. The sort of fine line we have to walk through is unless we're providing users with a very explicit way to say these things are a set, we have to be careful that we have strong enough signals that we're guessing what the set is like really right, so that we can deliver on the user value versus just randomly throwing things together as a set. And so that's what makes the problem a little bit more complicated. But my short answer is we're definitely thinking about it. We've heard the feedback. That's definitely an investment that we plan to make in the future for sets.
Right. And my second question is about window management. When multiple apps are part of the same set, they're obviously sharing the window. How does my app know what size window it needs to create? What size do I pass to create window X? What happens if I override WM window post changing and stuff like that?
Yeah, so the way your app finds out what size it should open at is we just resize you.
Okay.
The window opens and we're like, oh, we've decided that you're going to be part of this set. This set is at this particular size, so we just like resize you and move you, and it's like, there you go. And yes, you can resist the change, in which case we just say, well, I guess this guy doesn't want to be part of a set, and we kick you out.
Okay, so I would just pop up in a second window if it didn't resize properly.
Yeah, we try to coax you into the set, but if you're just being stubborn, you don't want to go in, we can't force you.
What about if I have a button in my app that makes it go full screen? What happens then? Do I get kicked out of the set then?
Full screen is, yeah, we don't put full screen apps in sets. That doesn't really work out that great for the UI.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, in line with the taskbar, the tiles as well, you guys are thinking about, like, how does sets play a role when it comes to the tiles?
Yeah, I'll say it's accurate to generalize my answer before, which was, there's a consistency challenge that we have now with the current iteration of sets between taskbar and the way we represent sets, like on the desktop. But I don't think it's limited to taskbar. It just happens that when we look at sort of where minutes, like different surfaces we have in Windows where users spend time task switching, taskbar has a lot of has a lot of usage, right? And so that's an area we'll probably invest in first if I had to guess. I'm not committing to anything. Start is another area that clearly, like, if there's a representation of sets on the taskbar, there should be consistency also between the taskbar and start.
Okay. And another question, this is more like a more basic understanding. So if I like launch an application and the tab, so as an application, I'm responsible for creating that tab, like the plus symbol to like create new tabs, or, okay, so I should be like adding the extra code to like create those tabs and
oh, sorry, I might have misunderstood the question. No, there's no code required for you to get the plus. So basically, if your app is participating in sets, and
how do I say that I'm participating in sets?
Your app is participating in sets if it is a UWP application or a Win32 application. And there's a qualifier for the Win32 application. If you're a Win32 application that doesn't customize the title bar. If you're a UWP application, it doesn't matter, you participate.
For all practical purposes, when you say UWP, can I hear it as UWP and Centennial?
Yes, but the answer is going to be more nuanced. It's if you're centennializing a Win32 application, the Win32 application that you're centennializing still must not customize the title bar.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's like our goal to provide a more consistent experience for our users is that there's a plus that's available on every single window of the system all the time, and that provides, it basically means no matter what activity I'm engaged in, whether it's app or web, there's always a plus that takes me to a sort of familiar destination that can help me to get to what's next. And that's definitely the goal. But we also we sort of bear the responsibility of making sure that we don't break apps, because that also has a direct impact on user experience.
Right.
And so for V1 that you're seeing in the Insider builds, we've addressed UWP, a subset of Win32 applications. I think for the rest of the Win32 applications, we're exploring like how can we possibly, without breaking AppCompat, sort of bring them into the fold without requiring changes. But in the meantime, like for applications that have high engagement today and could benefit from sets, there's still a path. And that path is essentially the path that Office took, which is essentially check to see if sets is enabled, and then do some minor tweaks in the, do some tweaks in the application to basically participate, which is essentially moving custom content in the title bar into your app area.
Yeah, I think just to clarify, the terminology we've been using here, UWP and Win32, more formally, UWP is core window-based application, Win32 is HWin-based application. I don't know if that helps or confuses things.
It does. And sorry, just to make sure I got it. So if I'm customizing my title bar, that means I'm ready to participate in sets. If not, then my app is not ready to participate in sets.
No, it's the other way.
The other way. Right, so if
you have a normal title bar, then we can put you in a set, and it's not a problem. If you customize your title bar, then there's a conflict between your customization and what we're doing.
Okay.
And our currently, we're just playing it safe, and we're just backing off.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Thank you.
All right, so going back to the question about window resizing, so what happens if my app is in a set and I do the try resize view or something like that? Like there's a call to resize the view. Does that fail or does that still work?
If you are the active tab in the set, then you can go ahead and resize yourself any way you like. If you are not the active tab, then the resize will probably fail.
Okay. And what if we use the compact overlay?
Compact overlay apps also are taken out of the set.
And do they go back in if
they
you
will,
exit?
yeah, and I believe they go back in. Do they go back in? We have some other developers here who are now being put on the spot. Okay.
Yeah, so I believe
but that is clearly a point that we need to explore and investigate.
I'll say, so some of the thinking around that, I think I know in the current builds, the compact overlay, like if the window basically becomes eligible for sets, it doesn't get inserted into the previous set. The challenge there is sets by their very nature, because it's about a user trying to engage and do stuff, these sets can be transient, right? And so if a window, I'm just describing a problem, potential challenge. If a window supports compact overlay and gets ejected from the set because it can't be resized and all these other things, there's no guarantee that the set that it came from is still there. There's no guarantee that the set serves the same purpose. There's no guarantee it's the same set of tabs. And so there's sort of a trade-off we have to make is, like, are we willing to sort of put this thing back into a set that might be different and actually might not be contextually relevant anymore, and just sort of let's hope for the best? Or do we make a separate trade-off of, now this window goes back to being sets eligible, but it's outside of the set. Now we depend on the user to explicitly sort of group that back into the set. We're kind of erring on that side where the user has more control, with the slight I'll say with the trade-off of there's extra effort required for the user to drag in the set. But we're sort of erring towards, we want sets to be really useful for the user, and when we have to make a choice between implicit and explicit, we'll kind of go towards the explicit route.
Okay. And I have a question about the relationship between the way you showed a set completely restoring back to its original state when it was closed.
Yeah.
Or more specifically, the app returning to that state with the the task clicked on and all that. How does that relate to like suspension and like tombstoning? Because it seems kind of related to me. Is that we had some code that like if the application gets terminated, like we have to restore it, and now it seems like there's a conflict between those two.
So I'll provide a quick answer, and then Raymond can provide a more detailed answer if necessary. For Win32 applications, I mean, if you have a Win32 application tab with other apps, and let's say the Win32 application is not in focus, you can think of it as it's a window that's completely hidden by another window. What happens today without tabs? It just continues to run. And so that's sort of the answer for Win32. For UWP, it's different. For UWP, if you have a couple windows and they're sort of almost completely overlaid each other, but not quite, your UWP application that's basically under a window should still run. When they're completely hidden, And in the case when you have a UWP application that's basically not in focus but tabbed with other things, there is a chance that that application could get suspended. And so the recommendation there is if there's information you want to do, if there's tasks that you want to run in the background, there's a way in the platform to create background tasks that continue to run even when the app is suspended. And so that's sort of the guidance there. But it is correct that if a tab is not in focus, it's a UWP app window. If it's completely hidden, which it will be if it's tabbed with another app that's in focus, that could be suspended. And the app just needs to know that that's a possibility and be able to handle it potentially through background task. Is there a more detailed?
Yeah, so I think you're talking about the conflict of when an app gets suspended. Right now, there are two ways it can come back. It can either be resumed or it can be terminated and restarted.
Correct, yeah.
And with activities, we introduced a third way for it to come back, which is it is restored from an activity. And your app can detect each of these three cases, because in the case where it's resumed, the app was never actually terminated, and you can just continue. In the case where it is terminated and restarted, then you get a normal activation and then you can look at its previous execution state. And in the case where it's resumed from an activity, you're going to get a protocol activation. And so those are the ways you can distinguish how your app is coming back and decide whether the correct thing to do is to try to resume what the user had when the app was terminated, or because the user is coming in to try to start or to resume some other thing.
Okay. So anytime it's like a restore, it'll be that protocol launch, not the normal activation.
If it was an activation from an activity, it will be a protocol launch.
Okay. Thank you, man. That makes sense.
Thank you. So we're way over time, but we appreciate all the questions. These are great questions. If you have any other questions, or if you think of something maybe after the session, Raymond and I will be at the booth this afternoon. Please swing by. We'd be happy to chat as long as you like. So thank you so much.
Thank you.